My name is Richard. My question is, why did the Catholic Church establish the Bible? My understanding has had to do with uniformity of belief, particularly those passages that could be used in the daily Mass.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the question. So I think that way of construing the history is probably wrong. It's not like the church was sitting around and saying, you know what we really need? We need uniformity of belief. What are we going to do about it? I know, let's constitute a Bible. That's really not the way it happened. If it were, that would seem to be a really bad way to establish uniformity of belief, because the Bible does not lead to uniform belief. If all you have is the Bible as your rule of faith, what you really get is doctrinal chaos and divergent interpretations that are mutually contradictory. So that's not really the function or purpose of the Bible. The Hebrew Scriptures, of course, had been passed down in Jewish culture and regarded by many, not all universally, as divine text and divinely authoritative and inspired. But even within Judaism, they didn't lead to uniformity of belief. I mean, Judaism at the time of Christ was deeply sectarian, and Christ himself offered authoritative interpretation of the Old Testament Scriptures, and his interpretation would be authoritative and could lead to uniformity of belief. But the Scriptures themselves were by their very nature ambiguous. The apostles and their successors, of course, composed memoirs about Christ and the apostles and the life of the early church. And apostles like St. Paul wrote moral instruction and doctrinal instruction to individual congregations. There's no evidence from Paul's epistles that when he wrote them, he intended that they would one day be collected into a canon, together with the four Gospels and then tacked on to the Hebrew Scriptures. It doesn't seem that he anticipated that. But naturally, because of their close connection to Christ, these writings were gathered up by the church and cherished. Again, not so much because they led to uniformity of belief, but because they were inspired witnesses to the life of Christ and to the teaching of the apostles, and thus they were edifying and they had value and for the liturgy, as you rightly note. And so they were cherished and venerated as sacred and divine. But when it came to the question of uniformity of belief, Christ actually established a different rule of faith from the Bible. He established the church. And so Matthew chapter 16 tells us that Christ said to St. Peter, "You are Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it, and whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven." So that's how we attain uniformity of belief in the Catholic Church, is through the teaching office of the Church. St. Paul said, if anyone wants to be contentious, know that we have no other practice, nor do the churches of God. It's the Catholicity of the faith, the witness of the Church Universal, together with the apostles and the chief of the apostles, St. Peter, who has the keys, that we attain that uniformity of belief. The Church promulgated the Bible as the Word of God when it did, because there were spurious gospels out there. There were false contenders to the claim to revelation. And so it was necessary to give an authoritative list of inspired books. And so relying upon the witness of sacred tradition and the universal practice of the Church and the teaching office of the Church promulgated the 73 books that we currently have.